In the last lesson, we looked at how to create accounts and how to get Ether from a faucet. In this lesson, we're going to start looking at how do we execute transactions, and you're going to need to have that Ether if you haven't got it yet. So, unfortunately, you can't really continue until you do that, but once you do, that's what we're going to do here. So first, let's create a new account. First of all, I'm going to paste in this entropy business again, and then I'm going to create a new account with it. So I'll just say account2 equals web3.eth.accounts.create entropy. So now I should have account 2 with its own private key and a different address, and I should still have account 1, or just account rather. So what we want to do here is actually just send Ether from our first account to our second account. So we want to see how do we generate that transaction here on the back end. It's ultimately a three-step process. So the first thing you need to do is create a transaction. The second thing you need to do is sign that transaction with your private key so that the blockchain knows it came from you. And then you need to submit the signed transaction. So there's several things we need to do, and we're going to take it bit by bit. So the first thing I want to do is just calculate an amount, and so that the amount that we want to transfer, essentially. So we'll say, we don't need caps lock on. So we'll say variable amount equals web3.utils.toWay. And then we'll give it a string of 0.5, and then we'll give it another string of Ether. So if we look at amount is going to be this long string of 5 with 17 zeros behind it. So essentially what this utility function does is translate what looks like a typical decimal into what the blockchain will expect in terms of the number of way. The next thing I want to do is just generate the transaction we were talking about. So I'm going to say variable tx equals an object. So I'll open a new object and we'll just type it out. So we'll say the to address, we'll say is account2.address. The value is the amount we previously said. We got to give it a gas amount and a chain ID. So gas I'm not really going to explain here, but we'll just say 2 million. And then we'll say a chain ID of 3 for Ropsten, which is very important. So now we should be able to see our TX look like that, and that's right. So far, what we've done is we've just set up a transaction that says we're going to send half an Ether to the address of account 2. So we haven't signed it or done anything with it, but that's what we have. So let's look at how to actually sign it as the next step. So we'll say, first of all, let's just set up an empty variable called signed tx, and this is what we're going to put it into. Okay, so now we'll say, this is how we're actually going to sign it. So we'll say web3.eth.accounts.sign transaction, and then we'll just pass in tx as the first argument, and then we'll say account.private key. So this is what I said earlier when I was saying that we would use the private key of an account to sign a transaction. So we're going to sign this transaction to account 2, and it's from the first account. So then we need to actually capture the response of the signature. So we'll say then response, and I'm going to leave that open and do this on a new line. So I'll say signed tx equals response. Make sure I close this off properly. Okay, so now if I type in signed tx, I get back the actual signed transaction. So now we can actually execute the transaction. So if I say web3.eth.send signed transaction, and then I give it my signed tx.raw transaction. That's the actual transaction that you need to send, is the raw transaction bit. And then we'll say dot then receipt console.log out the receipt. And then we also want to catch any errors. So we'll say dot catch error console.error. Error. I'm just gonna do a quick scan and make sure I wrote all that right. It looks okay from here, so we'll run it and see what happens. This will take a minute. Oh, I'm missing a parenthesis, so I did not do everything properly. Oh, after receipt, I need another parenthesis. Okay, this will take a minute, so I'm gonna pause the video while this runs. Okay, so that may have taken a minute and a half for me. It may take less or longer amount of time for you. Just be patient. But now I have this transaction hash, so I'm going to copy this, and we're going to go look at this on Etherscan. Okay, so I'm just going to paste the transaction hash here on ropsten.etherscan.io, and we can see that we successfully transferred half an ether from one address to the other. I don't have those addresses memorized or anything, but I'm going to assume this is my account and my account 2. And we'll go check those balances in just a second and verify it. So now that we've run all of that, we can actually check our account 2 balance here, Web3 ETH get balance function we ran earlier. And we can see that now we have half an ether there, and then I'll run it again for account 1, which is just account. And we have a little bit less than half an ether, and that's because when you run a transaction you have to pay gas fees. So he lost a little bit in terms of gas. So that's it for this lesson. If you look in the written content for this lesson, you'll see that there's a couple of extra sort of utility functions that we defined. You're going to want to take a look at that because we're going to end up using them in some of the later lessons. But other than that, that is it for this lesson.